Thank you, everybody, for coming. Thank you. It's great to see everybody's smiling faces, rejuvenated by the spring and the good weather, and now the summer. This is one of our Excelsior NYC's ongoing meet and greet informational sessions with candidates in current races in the city. We're a newly formed not-for-profit that's really focused on bridging gaps between New Yorkers and focused on pragmatic solutions. Now would be a good time to mention that if you're not speaking, it'd be a great thing to mute yourself. And I would love to turn it over to our host, Adam, and co-founder, Adam Herbst, who's one of a number of fellow co-founders and leaders of the group here on the call. Thank you.
Thanks, Adam. So yeah, hi, Tali. Very nice to meet you. I'm the president of Excelsior NYC, and we have some other executive board members on with us today, and we have a lot of people who have engaged with us, and hopefully we'll continue to engage with our membership as we look to grow the organization. Avram mentioned that we're a new charitable non-for-profit organization, and really the goal of our organization is to bridge the gaps that separate different groups of New Yorkers. We all have seen in the last year, a lot of issues which we could talk about, and we will certainly talk about. And we were very concerned, the senior team here at Excelsior, that people weren't speaking with each other. And the purpose of our organization was to bring the shared goals and allow for some kind of forum where we can actually have conversation and not talk over each other or across each other, but actually have opportunity for collaboration and solve a lot of the problems that's facing our city. I think, our vision is a really two-pronged effort where we want to identify neighborhoods and communities that are right for public events and celebrating things that they share. And then two, to engage the leaders of the community in those different communities and different groups, in private dialogue. Really, we see that the cycle continues to just become more polarized. And, I'm sure you're seeing this as you're running for DA, that there's just so much distrust and disdain. And, there's just a lot of problems that need to be fixed. And this is why I think a lot of our members are, very eager to hear from you, how we can bring the tension down and awareness around a lot of the issues that we're seeing in the city, and try to find, collaborative solutions that, I think all New Yorkers are looking to solve. So, we're doing this now, and, we're very eager to hear from you, and we want to thank you for joining us. I anticipate the group will be, very active in their conversation with you right now. I think a lot of people have already met you in one way or another, but, this is a great opportunity for, a quieter, more intimate conversation with you. And what I'll do first is I'll turn it over to one of our other executive members of Excelsior, Andrew Lebwall, who I know wants to kick off with the first question. So again, Tali, thank you. And I'll turn it over to Andy now.
Okay.
Hi, and Tali, it's good to see you again.
Hello.
It's been a little while.
Nice
Hi.
to see you, Andy. Thank you.
About 4 years ago, Tali and I had children in the same nursery class at Heschel. So.
Yes.
So Tali, let's start out just by talking about what you'd like to see change about how the Office of the District Attorney is used, and the changes that you would bring to the management of the prosecution process and to the management of the office.
Sure, great. And it is really great to see you again. And I hope your family has been well. And thank you to all of you. And before I answer your question, I want to just share my appreciation for your mission in the way that Adam described it, because, I am new to politics, although not new to law enforcement and public service. And I am really disheartened by how polarizing and polarized the political environment really is right now. In a democratic primary, not just because it can feel so awful, all of that fighting, but because I find that it just takes people away from working on solutions. So, it's a very emotional and angry atmosphere, and not one that's about problem solving. And these are hard problems, right, that require a lot of investment and thought in order to get it right. But I do want to say something positive, and that's really a counter to that, because I have also found, as I've been traveling around Manhattan and doing my job standing at the park and talking to people, that when you actually just talk to the people who live here and work here, people's goals are fundamentally much more united than you would think of, from the sniping of the leadership. And they are aligned with my core convictions and why I've had the career that I've had. And I have found that incredibly affirming. So, I've always believed that opportunity is really what this city is about, and that there is no opportunity without safety. If people can't move around freely, if they don't feel safe in every space, in their home and in the street and in the subway and at work, and when they're meeting the police, then they can't thrive, they cannot prosper. It's why my parents brought me to this country. And I think it's particularly important now to make sure that safety is at the core of our plan for recovery. And so, Andy, to answer your question, when I look out at the Manhattan DA's office, a massive institution, $150 million budget, 1,200 people working there, 600 lawyers, 600 support staff, a mini police force, all sorts of other areas of expertise. It seems to me that the office has to put its principal resources, so what I would do, into 4 categories. And the office is doing some of these things, but it is not doing all these things and not doing them with the vigor that I would want it to. So maybe I can kick off our discussion just by listing those, and then we can go deeper into them. First, my 2 main pillars, and they're aligned in my mind, is gun violence and gender violence. One is very visible and prevalent, right? We all know we are north of 600 shootings this year. That's a really high number to be at in June. A really terrible trend, I think, demands a vigorous response. I should tell you, there are only a handful of the candidates in this race, and certainly no viable candidate other than me who is committed to still prosecuting gun possession, right? And the second, twin issue with that is gender violence, which is the invisible to the visible, also very prevalent. Domestic violence, sexual assault, violence that is, you don't see it, it's shrouded in shame, it's underreported, but I think has really also held people back and has not gotten the response that it deserves from law enforcement. And that has also gotten worse during the pandemic. So even before the pandemic, just to give you one data point, the police were receiving about 250,000 domestic violence calls a year. And we know that it only got worse as people were stuck at home in really difficult situations. Third, kind of where I started, people have to feel feel safe moving around in the street, right? And that includes in the subway. We just put up a subway safety plan this afternoon to really try to take on violent crime in the subway, both on behalf of the people who ride and on the people who work in the subway, and have said over and over again this year how uncomfortable they are feeling, how less secure they are feeling. And I think hate crimes is also a part of this. I have been hearing so much over the course of this year, principally from the Asian American community and the Jewish community, how the specter of hate crimes has really made people feel inhibited, looking for walking partners, for example, to even just walk down the street, telling their kids to cover their kippah under a baseball cap, exactly the kind of behavioral shifts that a hate crime is designed to bring out, right? To make a group of people, not just one person, feel affected. And then finally, it's always been a special responsibility of this office to investigate and prosecute economic crimes, and to really make sure that we are all operating by the rules of fair play. So that's a big category, but an important one that includes things like wage theft, cybercrime, tax evasion, fraudulent business practices, a different way of harming your fellow New Yorkers, and one that I think really degrades all of us when it happens.
Thanks so much. Another thing that comes up a lot in the course of this campaign, in the course of the year that we have just had, is the sense, and this also speaks to Excelsior's mission, that a lot of people cast the notion of safety as being in zero sum with principles of equity. we don't like to talk about everything being a zero sum around here, but I'd love to hear what you have to say about that sort of approach to things, of the notion that there is somehow a zero sum between people being safe and between equity and social justice being a part of the criminal justice system.
Yeah, I don't know that I could find the word strong enough to express my objection, displeasure, or disagreement with that idea. I just think it's completely upside down, and I hear it all the time. And I think that the effect of it is actually quite drastic, because people who have decided that they're going to prioritize equity over safety will just sort of throw their hands up. And the answer is to make law enforcement smaller, to do less, to pull back, as if that feeds equity. And I think it really does not. So let me explain. First of all, I think that safety is equity. If you just think about, and let's think about racial equity and talk about gun violence. So 96% of the victims of shootings this year, of those 600 plus shootings that I've talked about, are being Black or Latino. So it just stepping back from vigorous investigation and prosecution, I think is deeply unfair to the people who are experiencing it. I see that as an equity issue. I also know from experience, Andy, that these things are mutually reinforcing. That's what Eric Holder taught me when I first started to work for him in the Justice Department. And it was really our project in the Brooklyn DA's office to make sure that we were delivering on both. And the more we did that, the more people had confidence in the criminal justice system, which is an important pillar of equity, that everybody feels like they can come forward when we are in communities. People feel like we are there on their behalf, and not as some kind of outside invasive force. And the strategies that we use to achieve equity, to advance equity in Brooklyn, we didn't achieve it, right? I mean, we're all still working on this. I think are ones that never infringed on safety in any way. So we shrunk the criminal justice system without any adverse impact on crime by not bringing cases anymore that really weren't making anybody's life better and had been disproportionately prosecuted in communities of color, like marijuana possession. Then for many of our prosecutions, we created more sophisticated responses. So a person is still arrested, prosecuted, and then given an alternative using the leverage of the criminal justice system to go into a drug treatment program, to go into a mental health program, which will hopefully have the effect of returning them more safe, right, into the community, rather than just to see people cycle through crime all of the time. And I think particularly for low-level crimes, that was really the standard that we set in Brooklyn, is what other reasonable people now are sort of grasping for. Different, again, from what many of the candidates in my race are talking about, which is just to do nothing. Never prosecute theft under $250. Never prosecute trespass. Never prosecute shoving. Never prosecute harassment. Crimes that are really deeply impactful on people's lives, right? I mean, the person that it's really become a two-person race between me and Alvin Bragg. He boasts about only ever having prosecuted one misdemeanor, which I think is pretty wild. That's 80% of what this office does, and involves extraordinarily serious things, right? Strangulation and the kinds of thefts that I've described, and lying under oath, and endangering the welfare of a child, and so on.
Thank you.
Andy, just before you just jump to your next question, let me just give a couple more people an opportunity, and then we'll come back around, to you, Andy, if that's okay. Allison, I know you had a question. Would you like to ask it? And just maybe introduce yourself.
Yes, I would love to ask it. I'm trying to make my screen bigger, but I don't think I'm going to be able to do that. Hi, I'm Allison Bromberg. As I said, Tali and I met with some friends way back when, in June, when she was first announcing her candidacy. But my question is, and you touched upon it very briefly, in light of the recent attacks on our streets on Asian Americans and Jewish individuals, it's clear that hate crimes are on the rise. However, a closer look shows that these criminals have been through the revolving door of the criminal system for various misdemeanors, which is what you just mentioned about misdemeanors. The real problem seems to be that repeat offenders are released into our streets, and they inevitably commit more violent crimes. So how would you prevent the tendency of a convicted criminal to reoffend? How would you prevent that in your office?
Yeah, so that is, of course, Allison, is the holy grail is not just to disrupt a crime and have some accountability for it and the safety that comes from removing a person from society, but to actually reduce recidivism, right? To stop that revolving door. And I already talked about some strategies of using the criminal justice system as a way to steer people into resources. And I think that that's a huge part of it. Look, we have a mental health crisis in our city. We do. And not all of it is going to be solved in the district attorney's office. We can do our part and do it well, but I also think that the district attorney needs to be an advocate for a very different approach than what we've had to mental health and also to homelessness, right? To get people supportive services that deals with some of this. Again, not as a replacement for what we do, but as a supplement to what we do. And I think that that's really important. In terms I think there's also something to say here about bail reform. So if I will, and just what a good bail system looks like, if you don't mind, I'm just going to do that because, I think that the current bail law needs some fixing. And while the next Manhattan district attorney cannot herself change the law, we will be an important voice in the next round of bail reform because it really matters what position the lead district attorney in the state takes. And the problem with the current bail law, as I see it, is that New York is the only state in the entire country, and also different from the federal government. So really the only jurisdiction in the country that doesn't allow judges to consider and prosecutors to argue that a person is a safety risk to others in deciding to set bail or detain them before trial. We're only supposed to talk about flight risk. And so safety is not text, it's subtext. And there's this whole convoluted system for what crimes you can make a flight risk argument for in order to achieve detention. And ultimately, I think safety is left out of the picture. And I think that that's wrong. And in the last two rounds of bail reform, we in the Brooklyn DA's office and other prosecutors argued for what I'm talking about, and we lost, but we tried. And I think that people know that something is not right, and we will have another chance. And again, I'm virtually alone in my field in taking this position. And Andy, to go back to what you said, I don't think that this is in any way meant to throw away the values of equity and fairness and proportionality that underlie a lot of that bail reform. I was an advocate for bail reform in the sense that I don't think poor people should be held before trial because they can't put $300 or $400 together if there's no reason for that detention. And that was disproportionately happening to people of color. And I object to that. I think that's wrong. I don't think the choices are either to do that or to be in the situation that we are in now. We can do better.
Thanks for that. Shelley, I see you raising your hand. Would you like to ask the next one? And just introduce yourself if you would, please.
Okay, we've met Sheldon Fine. I'm chair of the Health and Human Services Committee of our community board, and recently conducted a forum on hate speech, bias, hate crimes, and so on. And it was very informative. The DA's office participated. We have many agencies. What I found, and I found before and since, is most people do not know why certain activities are not crimes, not hate crimes, why they're not acted upon by the police, by the DA's office. So that's one thing. How can the DA's office better educate people? And second, when it comes to hate crimes, is there any thoughts that you have about expanding the definition so that more of this very vile and hurtful activity affecting anti-Semitic activity, anti-Asian, everybody is not given more attention or satisfaction to the person who has suffered it in terms of getting some care and reaction that's soothing, that's reassuring, that's supportive from the DA's office.
Mhm. Yes, so I have learned in the course of campaigning that people disappointingly don't know even that much about this office, the fact that it's elected, what it does, let alone what is the definition of a hate crime. And it is really important for us to do that work and to name hate crimes for what they are and to tell people who are experiencing them, we see you and we understand the harm to you. So just in 2 sentences, a hate crime is different from an ordinary crime because the victim was selected because of something about her, her race, her religion, her gender, her ethnicity, and so on. And when something is a hate crime, as opposed to an ordinary crime, if you prove that selection, okay, or that intent, then the sentence is increased. It's a sentencing enhancement. Obviously, speech is not a crime in our country, and I would not have it any other way. But this is about an underlying crime that is accompanied by an intent that, as I said earlier, has the effect of terrorizing and victimizing an entire group of people. And I think that that is why it ought to be treated differently. And you know, Shelley, I was on the New York State Bar Association task force convened on hate crimes because in 2019 we thought we were at crisis levels, and it's gotten so much worse. That year we had peak number of anti-Semitic hate crimes, and now look. Right. And we looked at whether the definition could be expanded and how, and I'll tell you the truth, I really don't think we can. And that's the conclusion that the task force came to, and that's not even what we need to do. It's not about expanding the definition. It's about training our prosecutors and investigators to be better at developing and moving quickly, because you often have a short window to find this evidence, at developing the evidence of that intent, of that targeting that I've talked about. And we found that people around the state were just not well trained to do this. So that's, that to me is really the first step. And then I think we can do a lot of work in the DA's office to encourage reporting. Hate crimes are among the most underreported crimes they are. I mean, it's kind of cyclical. I think part of it is that people think they're not going to get anything out of coming forward. And in that sense, really work our way toward better accountability.
Thank you. So we scheduled till 6:45, and I know there's a lot of questions. So what I'm just gonna say that we have Stacy, then Mark, and Allison in that order asking their questions. If anyone else has questions, just please send me a chat privately that you want to ask a question. And I'd like to be respectful to Tali's time and to everyone's time here and still end at 6:45. And maybe we'll have another call in the future, but let's get through this evening first. So I'm going to turn to Stacy first, and then Mark, you'll be next, and then Allison.
Well, given the time crunch, I had 3 questions, but I'll just limit it to 2. My first question is, I can already hear briefs being filed for tenancy for the folks that have been living in the Lucerne and the other hotels for legal tenancy, because they have been occupants long enough to claim those rights. So what, if anything, can be done to deal with that situation? That's my one question. And the second question is there anything unethical about the fact that Open Hearts and also the representative, Sarah Lind, is basically, but more in particular, Open Hearts seems to be totally funded by Project Renewal. And instead of being an organic neighborhood sort of group, it actually seems to be a very unethical group that was formed based on money and PR representation. And I would say that you could even look into political gamesmanship by local politicians. And so what turned out to be a sort of local groundswell of stuff to, gravitas in the neighborhood was met by this group And this group apparently may have been a sham organization that was funded by Project Renewal. And it just seems to not have gotten much attention other than to have gotten good PR and good people to come and sort of champion it. But ironically, as digging and digging and digging went on, that's what people have discovered. And there's just something very unsavory about that. And something seems more than just unsavory. And I'm just wondering what your thoughts might be on that.
Okay, thank you, Stacy. So, a lot of these issues are really outside the scope of a district attorney's office, which is about enforcing criminal law. So like arguments around tenancy would be a matter for civil litigation. It's not something that we would weigh in, but I would like to say something about this situation generally. And it's sort of a continuation of what I talked about with Allison earlier, because I think that the DA has to use her position and her platform to advocate for policies that are in the hands of other parts of government when they impact safety. And it's clear to me that if you give homeless people just a place to rest their head for 8 hours a day and nowhere to be during the day and not the supportive services that they need, then of course that's going to be really hard on the neighborhood that they are in, and is going to lead to crime and to instability and to all of the things that none of us want for ourselves. And I know from my work in the domestic violence space that supportive housing, housing where you are also getting treatment and whatnot, and which, by the way, it doesn't cost more than what I'm seeing being spent for a night at a hotel under the current system. It does so much more to stabilize families, to keep people out of homelessness, all of the things that we want, right? So it's more humane and also better for all of us, right? For the safety of an entire community. And so that's really where I am at and how I want to use my position.
Okay, thank you. Mark, would you like to ask your question?
Hey, Tali, nice to see you. So you touched upon my question sort of when you were talking about both reducing recidivism and also with underreporting of hate crimes. But, something that I've heard on the streets from both people in law enforcement and, community members is cops or police officers, tend to try and discourage people from, filing complaints or taking complaints for minor crimes because they say the DA's office isn't going to prosecute it. Now, obviously, the answer to that lies somewhat in the middle. But I think, we've seen stuff in our community in recent times with, some attacks where the police have sort of tried to not take a report because they feel the DA isn't going to prosecute that. I think when the courts were shut down, we saw a lot of that during COVID. And obviously it's a careful balance, but some of these same people that are repeat offenders may not ever enter the system because it's minor crimes and they're never held accountable. So sort of how do we fix that relationship between the DA and the NYPD and create that balance?
So Mark, I hear that anecdotally also, when I talk to people in communities, and this is where I think we really need a reset, and we're going to get one, right? With a new election. I want the police to succeed, right? I think there are some things in policing that need to be reformed to make it better, but I want policing to succeed just as I want prosecutors to succeed. We are partners in public safety, and I've just never been of the view that we don't want people to come forward and to report what's happening against them. In fact, for things like hate crimes, and even for some of these gender crimes, part of what I want to do is to have reporting come to the DA's office directly, which can totally happen, and it happens for certain crimes, because that's our job, is to be accessible in the first place.
Is just to follow up on that, you say people being able to come straight to the DA's office for reporting. Is it possible to have some sort of system where it's people who are victims of minor crimes, where the NYPD, an officer on the street may say, this isn't going to get prosecuted. We're not going to do the paperwork. Whereas if people aren't getting the response they want from the NYPD, they can reach out to the DA's office directly. Is that something that's
for sure? But we also have to fix this underlying problem where.
Agreed.
Because I also hear the other part of it, of the police they're not responding, they're not making the arrests. I mean, there's a lot of disorder and confusion and finger pointing and I would say all around depression around this issue, actually. Yeah, and we can do better.
Thank you.
I'm going to turn to Avram Rosenberg next, and then we'll go to Allison after that. You're on mute. Avram, you're on mute.
Hey, Tali, it's me again. Thank you. Tali, I was just reminding myself, I was reviewing your outreach page, the LGBTQI community, and noting that it's such a page is missing from some of the other candidates. But I was wondering if you could give us a little bit of background about how your experience informs your approach to your policies in this issue.
Sure. Yeah. So, when I think about this job, I think that really the frame through which I see things is who are the people who are the most vulnerable and need us to see that and to respond to that. And people from the queer community are overrepresented among victims of crimes, right? Hate crimes, other kinds of crimes, but born really of discrimination. We find more LGBTQ plus youth in the sex trafficking industry, for example. And so part of it is sensitivity to that. And knowing that there's a little extra work for us to do. There's also real distrust for some people in the LGBTQ plus community of law enforcement because of historic discrimination and mistreatment once they do come forward and are in the hands of law enforcement, or when they are the defendants in cases. And that's why sensitivity and also diversification of the office is really important for me to be able to do, so that there is this openness and connection between us and all of the people that we are meant to serve.
Thank you. Allison, you're on mute, Allison. Are you ready for your question?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. Thanks for being here, Tali. It's nice to see you.
Nice to see you.
We had met a while, months back too. And I really appreciated your speaking with us, then as well. I think a different group, but, obviously safety has become the top of the discussion in every race. And we're concerned about that, but I have a sort of a bit of a different question, not totally unrelated, but just going back to something you had said in the beginning, about how you're hearing that people are more unified, or that you have some hope that people will be more unified than we think, because it's a very really disturbingly polarized atmosphere right now. And I'm hopeful of that too. And among the many questions we've asked you that are outside of the scope of DA, I realize that's probably the most outside the scope of a DA, but since you brought it up, how do you see that happening? And do you have, particular ideas about that kind of conversation? I've been, I'm out a good amount campaigning for one of the city council candidates, Maria Danzillo, and I'm actually speaking to Andrew and your team about some time with you, but it is really polarized. So I just wonder, I have some thoughts, but I wonder what if you have thoughts on that, and if you see how that we might make that happen at some point.
Yeah. So I don't think we're going to depolarize in the next 8 days. I'm going to be honest with you. I'd say things are going to intensify. We're really in the heat of it now. But we would have never in a million years wanted what the last year was for our city, for our neighbors, and this sense of insecurity that so many people have. But it has sort of confirmed that all of our basic needs are really the same. And so I think that if we built out our institutions to put all of this first, right? The things that we've talked about tonight, and to do it with integrity, I think that will go a long way. I have to think that, and I actually do think that that part of why people are so polarized is because they've just been so let down. Our city government is just, God, it's such a mess in so many ways, and all this incompetence. And sometimes you don't really feel it, but then when something like a pandemic hits, you feel it. It should have figured out that, the crisis of homelessness before a pandemic, should have dealt with some of these systemic inequities before a pandemic, should have improved the connection between policing and prosecution before a pandemic. And that I am quite sympathetic to, that people are really frustrated, and it leads to that elevated temperature. And so we just have to model something different. And I think that we can. I think in this particular atmosphere, part of why I've done well is because people want experience. They want, sometimes that you have the luxury of sort of rolling the dice in a different way. In this moment, I think people want to see, have you led? Can you lead? Can you actually do something? Is it just words? Remember, Bill de Blasio said his number one priority was homelessness and he was going to fix it.
Yeah, no, absolutely. Thank you for that. And even on that topic, it's too another one that's become binary. Like you can't both, care about helping those who are unhoused and also be concerned about the impact of the community. So so I liked your answer on that as well, that the reality is that it is nuanced. And but I appreciate your answer that it's sort of going to take the proof is in the pudding to show people that it can be done.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thanks, Allison. So if I may, I'd like to ask a question just because I want to get to know you a little bit more, Tali, and then I'll throw it over to Andy Lebwald to ask another question. And I'd like to leave a couple minutes, just a minute or two for you, just to, kind of give some closing statements and any remarks that you want to say to our group. We have some interesting groups. So I just want to, carve out some time towards the end just for you to speak, and let us know anything that you want to say. But just to get to know you a little bit more, I'm just curious, what's the toughest case that you've worked on, and why was it the toughest case, and what was the outcome of those kind of cases? I think that's going to say a lot about you, and it might tell us a little bit more about what you find to be challenging, and lend itself well to the group understanding a little bit more about you.
Yeah. So I'm having trouble choosing between two, so I might just give you both of them. So because they're different, and they show different things. So one is a murder case that I was doing when I was pregnant with my third baby, and the defendant was one of the defendants. It was actually there were, I think, many defendants in that case. I'm not going to say the exact number because I don't like to be too specific about what this was. But one of the defendants who was detained before trial, we got a call one day that he was trying to hire somebody from his gang who was not incarcerated to kidnap me and cause me to lose the baby so that I would be so distraught that I would not continue to prosecute his case. And that was hard. And but I also learned something about myself, which is I just kept putting one foot in front of the other, and I continued to do it until the baby was born. And then my colleagues carried out the case, and we got convictions, and for every single person. And I also leaned a lot on my colleagues, not just my fellow prosecutors, but also the FBI and the US Marshals and all of the people who do this really hard work, and all of a sudden weren't just keeping other people safe, but were keeping me safe. And just to be on the other side of that was interesting and very impactful to me, and I was grateful to them. I also, when I was a white collar prosecutor, there was a case that I investigated for a very long time, and between interviews and grand jury appearances, I must have talked to like 200 people over the course of a very long time and putting that case. And in the end, we decided not to bring the charges because we felt that we didn't have it. And that's hard also. Sometimes that's the harder thing to do. And that's the work of justice also, is not to carry on because of ego, because of sunk cost, or whatever would be, the reasons to have made a bad decision there.
Great. I appreciate that. I think that, that kind of color is just important for us, not just to pepper you with questions, but sometimes understanding a little bit about your character and, what you find challenging and not, I think helps us quite a bit. So I appreciate your candor there and, sharing that, personal experience. I think that helps me, and I'm sure it helps others. So as promised, I'd like to turn it to Andy and then, give you a minute just before we end at 6:45.
Sure.
Tali, thank you so much. And thank you for this evening. Thank you for sharing all that you have. The last question I had is something that you've spoken about in a few of your other responses, but just to sort of provide a central answer for it, a lot of the functions of the DA's office rely on the city, and it's not a city office. One of the weird dynamics here is that your election is not a ranked choice voting election. And you may be facing a mayor who sees crime and safety issues very differently from you, or you may see you may be working with a mayor who sees crime and safety issues very differently from you in the other direction. What is your approach going to be to working with the mayor, working with the NYPD, working with all of the offices who have such a deep impact on the work of the DA, but who are not under your authority?
Right. Yeah. So it is really weird. We are chartered by the state. That's why our election is different. I'm going to talk about that in my closing remarks, but we are funded by the city and we are deeply affected by all the other races for the reason that you've just said. So it is undeniable that my work will be easier if we elect a mayor who is interested in both reforming and leading the police. And I say both of those things, and who shares a lot of the values that I have talked about with you tonight. So, you know, I'm not going to predict if it's going to be a harder or easier road for me to travel on the other side. We're still in the zone of hope right here. But, you know, my approach in general to other city agencies, aside from the police, I kind of have shared in the course of this discussion, where I think we have to be a voice for safety in everything. We have to be a voice for safety for the parts of our government that are deciding where to put methadone clinics, because we know that if you concentrate them within a few blocks, that's really hard on the residents of that neighborhood who now have an overpresence of people who are addicted to drugs and the people who come in to prey on them and sell drugs to them, and that need to be investigated and prosecuted. And I could go on, right? Decisions that are in the hands of others. We talked about homelessness that have safety effects. And I think that as part of our responsibility to stand up for that. Also in the legislative process, we talked about that with bail reform. And the fact that I have that experience in Brooklyn, having been involved in the legislative process, is really helpful to me, because we don't just want to wake up and see new laws that we don't agree with. And if we had more time, I would talk about some other spaces where I think we can be important advocates. So we are past our time. I do want to just say, Adam, just a couple of words in closing, just pivoting off of what Andy said, you know, that as Andy pointed out, this is not a ranked choice election and voting is already underway. So if I can be just a little bit political for a moment, if you vote for a candidate who is not a real contender, and I think that this has come down to a two-person race between me and Alvin Bragg. If you vote for a candidate who is not a real contender because of a slight preference for what he or she may be saying, you will be throwing away your vote, or worse, you'll really be giving it over, you know, to the alternative to me. So I ask you to take that really seriously. The Queens District Attorney's race was decided by 60 votes, 6-0. So, you know, you and if you're one other person in your life together could band together and possibly make a difference here. And while I'm hoping for a bigger margin, you know, it's really, it's tight out there. So make sure that you are being strategic, please. And please join us. We need people at the polls. The last person you talk to before you go into vote is so important. And the best is for it to be a person who's going through the same things and thinking about the same things and who cares about New York City and its recovery. So if you could do that, we would be so grateful. We could also have you write letters to your neighbors by email or by print. Join us in other ways to reach out. It is a local election, so you should feel quite empowered that you really can make a difference. And I hope you will. Thank you.
So Tali, thank you so much for joining us this evening. I think everyone is just very appreciative. And if I can speak on behalf of everybody, thank you. Like I mentioned at the beginning, Excelsior, our mission is that we really believe that, you know, the challenges facing New York are solvable, and, you know, the best solutions will come from New Yorkers themselves working with each other and not against each other to navigate, you know, the obstacles that, you know, we can do to build a better city for everyone. And that really is, at the end of the day, what we're trying to do. So we believe that, you know, you engaging with us has been a proper step in that right direction. And, you know, whatever the result is, we hope that you'll continue to engage with us and our membership. And we wish you the best of luck. And thank you again.
Well, thank you so much. Have a great evening, everyone. Good night.
Thank you so much, Tali.
Thank you so much. Good night.
Thank you.